Let's just start with the big news. I picked the Miami Heat to win the NBA championship.
Of course.
So I have Suns and Heat in the finals. Don't tell me why I'm wrong. Tell me why that's possible.
It's possible because Miami is one of the deeper teams in the league. They have one of the most dynamic forwards, center, so to speak, in Bam Adebayo. You have some tremendous shooting. I think Matt Strus is adding a lot that they weren't getting from Duncan Robinson as a bigger perimeter player. And of course, Spoelstra has been there, done that before. I think Kyle Lowry bringing his championship pedigree to the table is going to help. Again, I think a lot of it goes back to this. They're the number one seed, so you have home court advantage. Can you stay healthy? Because you think about it last year, Joy, who would have thought that it would have been Milwaukee and Phoenix in the finals? But injuries forced that to happen in those two teams because of attrition. They were able to fight through it. So I'm not mad at you for the pick. Don't get me wrong. I think a lot of things have to go right for Miami. I think Milwaukee is still the team maybe in the East that nobody is talking about, even though they are the reigning NBA champions. I think they still have all the components, and the championship, I believe, has to go through them.
So let's wind it back to the first round. The Nets and Celtics, I think, is probably one of the more interesting matchups. Now, I think that the Celtics are a really good team. They've improved a lot this year. But, man, when KD and Kyrie are on, it's just hard to pick against them. Who do you have coming out of that series?
Well, it depends on Robert Williams because the rim protection you're going to need with Kyrie and KD, I think is going to be very important. I think Seth Curry, his influence in this playoff series, I think you're going to see it two ways. I think you're going to see it hurt maybe Philadelphia, but help Brooklyn because that adds a guy that can space the court. Think about it. I'm with you with this. Stay close. Kyrie and KD are a different level. Okay? They are different, and they can go on the road and get a win, which is very important in the playoff series, as you know. Just be able to get on that road. Now you shift the home court advantage back to your favor, and I just think that. I think Robert Williams is such a key to what they did in regards to protecting the rim, throwing the lobs at the rim. Now Daniel Tyson's done a good job. He's back again, but it's a different dynamic. His health is going to be dependent upon that. But if Brooklyn is on top of their game, I don't think Boston can beat them in 7.
So a former Brooklyn Net, James Harden, is now with Joel Embiid. He's struggled a little bit as of late. Are the Sixers capable with what they have of winning a title? I think Joel Embiid is the MVP, but I also feel like they are extremely reliant on Joel Embiid. And when it comes to the playoffs, they're going to need to be a little more deep.
Yeah. It's funny because Joel said this. He said that in the Toronto series that they're going to double team him. They're going to get the ball out of his hands. He's not looking to score 40. He wants to be a playmaker. That's all well and good, okay? But Tobias Harris has to be able to make shots. Matisse Thybulle, who's not a shooter, is going to have to figure out ways to contribute. Of course, James Harden. We ain't even talking about that aspect of it. Because if James is dynamic, of course, now that combination looks a lot different. Because how you going to play the pick and roll if James is knocking down a shot? And I do believe there's a lot of pressure on James Harden. He can say it's not all he wants to, but because he hasn't had the type of success in the playoffs that we've seen him have in the regular season, he may not want to put pressure on himself. But the trade was all set up by Daryl Morey to enhance what Joel Embiid wanted to do, which is get to a championship. But the relationship the two have from Houston, believing that James Harden, even despite not having some success in the late rounds of the playoffs, to bring him there. So this Philly team has components, but at the same time, I think there's a lot of gaps in their offense in particular. If Joel Embiid is not playing well, and we don't see the James Harden that we see when he first came into Philadelphia after the trade.
So Phoenix, we're talking to Jim Jackson. Phoenix is obviously the best team in the league, and they've had a tremendous year, and they should be favored to come out of the West. Well, who is another team in the West that should be really scary to everyone?
Ooh, Memphis. From that perspective, I would say Denver, but Denver is not because they don't have their components there. I mean, listen, there's no surprises as to why Phoenix is at the top of the ledger, Joy. I mean, last year, you know how it is when the team gets beat. they can either go the opposite way and feel sorry for themselves, or what they've done is kept their balance together. And what I mean is that their core group stayed together. And more importantly, Joy, you've been around the sport enough to know this, and around the sporting world, they matured another year. Okay? They're young players, Mikal Bridges, Cam Johnson, Cam Payne, and even Devin Booker from a maturity perspective in the playoffs. They've all taken that next step this year. Started off a little slow at the beginning, but gained their momentum. And then you saw what kind of maturity they had, Joy, when Chris Paul went out and they didn't miss a beat. That says a lot. They're the team to beat. Listen, there's a lot of intriguing games. I mean, Dallas is intriguing because of Dinwiddie and because of Luka. Okay? Denver, just because of Jokic, he's going to make you play. Memphis is so dynamic, but they're young. Kind of like a young Phoenix team without Chris Paul. You know what I mean? With all those dynamics. So I just think across the board, when you look at the Western Conference, Phoenix is still the team to beat, okay, at the end of the day, in a 7-game series. But there are going to be some intriguing, I think, matchups within the Western Conference that are going to, make everybody have a good time and say, okay, could they push Phoenix to a 7-game series if they get to the Western Conference Finals?
Yeah, Jim, I think there's a lot of parity in the NBA playoffs this year. And we usually don't have that. We usually go in like, okay, this matchup could be interesting. But at the end of the day, we know it's going to be these two teams, whatever team LeBron's on and the Warriors or whatever, going into the finals. Even if you do pick Milwaukee and the Suns, there are certainly other matchups that wouldn't be surprising. Do you feel like this is a year where there's a lot of parity, or it's still going to end up being those two top teams?
Well, I think parity from the perspective is that the bottom teams you can see can compete and beat some of the higher level teams. It's not like the 6th seed can't advance to a Western or Eastern Conference final. And that's the thing that I love. So if you're the NBA, Joy, this is what you wanted. You want an intrigue at the end of the season, what you got with the play-in tournament, okay? You want an intrigue at the end of the season in regards to where the actual matchups were going to fall in line, meaning we knew Phoenix was going to be one. Could Miami hold on to number 1? Could Boston creep up to number 2? All these questions were going down to the last couple of weeks of the season. And if you're the NBA, that's what you wanted, because you wanted to figure out ways to make the regular season really matter and to have teams continue to play that had a shot at it. And that's what we have right now. Now, at the end of the day, teams are going to be the team. A 7-game series is meant for a team that's the better team. Now, some matchups favor different situations, but I still think Phoenix and Milwaukee are still the two teams that everybody has to look up to. Despite maybe Milwaukee just being 3, it doesn't matter to me. It's that they're the team because of Giannis and that experience, and Coach Budenholzer, Drew, Middleton, a healthy Lopez that you got to go through. But you're right on the parity part of it, though. You're right.
We're talking to Jim Jackson. I'm growing a little bored of the NBA MVP conversation, to be honest with you. I don't know what the criteria is. It changes every single year. A guy wins it, and I think it's deserved. And then the next year he has a better statistical season. So we got to give it to him because we gave it to him last year. So it's not that I don't think it's still prestigious and a great honor and a legacy thing. I do, but I kind of just can't get caught up in the drama of who the MVP is or isn't. I personally think it's Joel Embiid. I think he's been the most consistent the entire season. I think he's had to overcome a lot. He won the scoring title as a big man. I think he's the MVP. Obviously, if Giannis won, it wouldn't be outrageous. I don't think if Jokic won, it wouldn't be outrageous. But who is the MVP to you? And what, if you were voting, what is your criteria for valuable?
Well, I was going to ask you too. What do you base the concept on now? And it's a mixed question because I have something for you. Like when you look at MVP, it's based off what?
I think it's partly based off the statistics. Like you have to put up the numbers. I think your numbers have to enhance your team, like where you are, where you finish in the standings should matter, which is why I feel like even though Jokic has had an unbelievable statistical season, they're a 6th seed. I think it should matter where you land. And I also think if you removed them, where would they be? Would they even be in the competitive? Would they even be in the playoffs? Like what actual value do you add? What were the circumstances around? Did you have your full complement of roster the entire season? Is this a year where you were healthy, where you were great from the beginning of the season to the end of the season? Like I think you have to evaluate all those things and not just pick one factor that you like the most and elevate that as the most important factor for MVP. I think it's a nuanced conversation, but I feel like the voters kind of change what it is every single year. Like, what's the most important factor every single year?
Right. And I'm right about that, because early on, when I was talking about MVP, I had DeMar DeRozan and Steph Curry in there, okay, along with Jokic and Embiid, okay, and even Ja Morant. People were looking at me like, you're crazy. You don't have Giannis. I said, Giannis is right there. But the players I've named, especially Jokic, especially DeMar DeRozan, who improved his team, okay? Jokic played without his second and third option, which was important. And at the time, Steph Curry was playing without his second best option. But their teams were winning. Now, the narrative changed as we got into the year a little bit more. Giannis began to ascend because they started to win. You saw Jokic and Embiid still hang on. So the criteria is a little bit different. But I based it around, too, early on, Joy, like this. The guys that impacted winning, again, Chicago was a lot better, the record, at the time when we were talking about it because of DeMar DeRozan and what he brought to the table, okay? Memphis was a lot better during that time, and they still are, but we found that they could win without Ja. So that narrative changed a little bit more. But remember, we used to always base this. Are you winning games, and that means you're the MVP? I do think that narrative has changed a little bit more, because if Jokic wins it, his team is not the best team. His team is not at the top of the ledger. So that scale has shifted a little bit more if Jokic ends up getting that. And if it does tend to go that way towards Jokic, I still think it's Embiid over the course of the year, okay? But Jokic's numbers, 2,000 points, 1,000 rebounds, 500 assists, incredible. But I understand his team hasn't gotten it, but if he gets it, Joy, that's going to be the criteria moving forward, I believe. It's going to phase out, are you winning as much compared to, are you keeping your team as competitive without having the other advantages that the other MVP candidates have?
Yeah, I think so, until they want to change it to something else.
Change it again.
And then it'll be that. Well, it'll be interesting to see who ends up with it. Thank you so much for joining us, Jim. Really appreciate it. Have a great weekend, a great Easter weekend, and enjoy the NBA playoffs.
All right.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for watching. Subscribe here to get the latest from the show. Also, be sure to check out more of the best clips from The Herd, or go watch a few segments from other shows on FS1.